Call to order the Tuesday, December 12th, 2023 meeting of the East Lansing City Council, noticed as a discussion-only meeting. Could we please have the roll call?
Councilman?
Here.
Councilmember Meadows? Councilmember Watson?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Singh?
Here.
Mayor Brookover?
Here. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Watson, seconded by, who did second it? Dr. Altman. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Our next item is communication from the audience. I have one sheet from Mr. Sardar.
Mayor, could I make a motion briefly before?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, please.
I would like to move to excuse Councilmember Meadows' absence on grounds of illness.
You said, I'm sorry, on the grounds of what?
Illness.
Oh, okay.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Made by Altman, seconded by
Me, Singh.
Singh. Now, Mr. Sardar, sorry. It had nothing to do with you.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor and council members and audience here. My name is Tasin Sardar. I reside at 2822 Marfit Road. I'm here to advocate the council members to please consider and pass a resolution calling for a ceasefire in the conflict in Gaza. As you all have been watching in the news, it's taking a huge human toll. Now one may wonder, what does City of East Lansing have to do with a war in the Middle East? There are issues that are happening as a result of the conflict all around the world. It's fostering a climate of hate, discrimination, particularly against the Jewish and Muslim communities and the Palestinians. A 6-year-old child was stabbed to death in Chicago. 3 young Palestinian men were shot in Vermont. Also, as residents of East Lansing, we contribute about $500,000, according to one of the statistics, towards the arms that are being used by Israel. So I humbly request the City Council to consider passing this resolution so that this message propagates to our lawmakers, congressional lawmakers, who in turn can put pressure on the Biden administration to bring about an end to this conflict. Sadly, the United States was the only country that voted against the resolution in the United Nations Security Council when they had a resolution calling for a humanitarian ceasefire, which was co-sponsored by 100 countries. And 2 votes have been passed in the United Nations in the General Assembly, also calling for a ceasefire. So once again, I'd like to reiterate the importance of ending this human tragedy in Gaza and bringing about, helping contribute towards world peace at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ma'am?
If I may, we as a part of I'm also a member of the City of East Lansing's Human Rights Commission, and we passed the resolution unanimously yesterday. And we did so with a motion making a recommendation to the council to adopt the resolution.
And I assume you're going to be directing that to the council.
Yes,
You don't
we-
have it yet. So.
Yep, thank you.
Ma'am, do you have your sound on or something? There's some sound over there?
Something's on.
Or is it it's my kid? I'll turn it down, sorry. That's mine.
Sorry. Just,
It's good hearing, though, Mayor.
yeah, it's kind of astonishing after all the approbation that I take, but I guess my hearing's okay. Go figure. Well, not yet, anyway. Anybody else in the audience? Yes, sir. Yeah. Okay, that's okay. You can go ahead and speak. Please give us your name and then fill one of these out and get it up to us. Will you please?
Okay, thank you. My name's Ava Anderson. I'm a resident of East Lansing on Butterfield Drive. Some of you may have been familiar with my grandparents who lived here for like 50 or 60 years and were really active in the community, Robert and Elizabeth Anderson. I also came today separately to encourage you to consider a resolution for a ceasefire in Gaza. So I echo what the previous speaker said and just wanted to add a few of my own thoughts. I know that Ypsilanti, Detroit, Akron, Ohio, Seattle, Atlanta, Richmond, California, and several, Wilmington, Delaware, are all cities who have passed a ceasefire resolution. This is a political and cultural moment when every voice matters, where the politicians in our country have more power than almost anyone in the world to put an end to the genocide that's happening in Gaza right now. Alyssa Slotkin has not called for a ceasefire. Senator Peters has not called for a ceasefire. Senator Stabenow has not called for a ceasefire. By acting at this level, we show them that there is political viability to this. We need leaders who are willing to stand up for what is right. This is a time when the politics around Israel and Gaza are changing rapidly within the Democratic Party and within American culture at large. I've been thinking about this in historical context and wanted to share something that might cross the generational divide, which is that I've heard that the Vietnam War has been called the first television war because it was sort of the first time in the 20th century when there were reporters on the front lines who were showing the day-to-day what was happening. And that was part of why so many people in the US were opposed to that war and were horrified by it. What I'm living through right now is a live-streamed genocide. For those of us who are paying attention to journalists in Gaza, we are seeing on our phones every day images of dead children, images of children running up to stretchers, seeing their parents, 2,000-pound bombs going into residential buildings, children playing in hospitals that are then bombed, Israeli snipers shooting nurses, civilians being stripped, numbers written on their arms. I've also been paying attention to the corporate media in this country. I look at CNN, New York Times, Al Jazeera. I've been trying to get a wide range of perspectives. I look at what the IDF is putting out. It's terrifying. It's a terrifying moment to live through. And I also wanted to draw it to another historical moment for those of you who lived through 9/11 and the Iraq War. I know that now the wars that the US fought in Iraq and Afghanistan are regarded as massive mistakes. Brown University recently estimated the death toll at 4 million people in response to 9/11. At the time when those wars were launched, they were hugely popular, right? George Bush got on TV and was like, God's telling me to invade Iraq, and almost all of Senate voted for it. And now it's regarded as a huge mistake, 4 million people dead. We need leaders who are willing to recognize what is right in the moment. I do not support leaders who are against every war except the current one, or are against every civil rights movement except the one that's happening right now. So I urge you to act when the resolution comes from the Human Rights Commission to City Council. I know it would be impactful on the world stage and also really meaningful to a lot of us in this community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else in the audience that wishes to speak?
I'm Chris Root. I hadn't planned to speak, but I feel moved to join the two people who have just spoken. I very much respect Thassen's leadership, which I've seen on this issue for a long time, and I am one of the people who knows Ava Anderson's grandparents quite well, and they have been models in this community of acting on your beliefs. And Thassen raised the question, what does East Lansing have to do with a struggle that's overseas, that's far away? When there is a humanitarian catastrophe, it is a human issue that affects all of us. I cannot think of a reason to not feel connected to what is going on. And as Ava Anderson said, you know, if you're paying attention, you're seeing it every day. How can we not respond? I can also add that the East Lansing City Council has acted before on foreign policy matters, which is something I can add, you know, I can contribute to what's been said. Many people call what is happening now an anti-apartheid struggle because of the ways in which groups of people, a group of people is being discriminated against as a group, is being treated differently as a group by a state. During a previous anti-apartheid struggle involving South Africa, the East Lansing City Council was one of the first city councils in the country to take an action. And the City Council adopted what was called a selective purchasing policy, which was to look at what contracts it had and to see if there was a way of reducing, you know, putting a stop, a halt on contracts with US companies that were involved in South Africa. So when it is an issue of such profound consequence as human beings, the city has acted before, just as other cities are acting now regarding Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience? Anybody online?
No callers in the queue.
We have someone come from Virginia.
Hi, my name is Ayana Jean. I'm a law student here and a Palestinian American. I also want to join in asking you to follow behind other Michigan cities such as Detroit, Hamtramck, Dearborn, and now Ypsilanti in passing a similar ceasefire resolution. Asking for an end to killing shouldn't be controversial. It shouldn't be political, but for some reason, that's the situation we find ourselves in. It's astonishing that thousands of people have had to beg their city councils to simply pass a resolution asking for an end to killing when that's the least that we should be doing. I don't understand how anyone can look at the videos and images coming out of Gaza right now without their hearts shattering, especially when our tax dollars are funding the ongoing genocide and the weapons our country makes aid in the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. Not taking a stance is not neutral because our money is already speaking for us. I want to believe that all of you are in public service because you're motivated to do good and create positive change. What better change can you make than to save a life? What good is greater than putting an end to senseless killing? When the killing has stopped, then you can pick sides, then we can talk about politics, then we can disagree. But right now, this isn't a political issue, this is a human one. There are no two sides. 18,000 people have been killed. That is 18,000 too many. Half of the population in Gaza are children. Our tax dollars are saying yes to continue the slaughter. The least we could do, the very least, is to use our voice to put an end to the killing. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Anybody else in the audience? Anybody in the queue?
No callers.
Public comment is closed. Communication from council members. Dr. Altman, anything tonight?
No report, thank you.
Ms. Watson, anything?
No, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, anything?
Yes, just real briefly, I just want to first commend staff in a wonderful event here at the Hannah Center on Saturday. I know my son with a very loud iPad I really enjoyed his time during the Winterfest. So just really excited and grateful for those that participated and supported the event. So thank you. And then I think that was, I feel like I had other plans, but we'll call it an end at that.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing for tonight. Communication from city manager. Anything, sir?
I have 3 items. First item is celebratory. The Parks and Recreation and Arts Department School Age Child Care Program has been awarded a 2023-2024 out-of-school time learning grant for $654,000 through the Michigan Department of Education and in partnership with the Michigan Department of Lifelong Education, Advancement, and Potential. Supporting our before and after school program, summer camp program, the grant will fund STEM curriculum development and implementation, provide additional resources for staffing, training, guest speakers, field trips, supplies, and family support and engagement events in 2024. So congratulations to Kathy DeChambeau and her staff for the success in obtaining that grant that will continue a valuable program here in the community. The second item I had was to echo Mayor Pro Tem saying on staff, the vendors, the participants who all came to Winterfest 2023. Even though it was slightly warmer than we wanted, it turned out to be a great event, and I think it was about 2,000 participants that came through that day. So congratulations. And then the third item is just to announce city offices will close at 1 p.m. this Friday for the employee recognition and holiday celebration. The East Lansing Public Library and East Lansing Hannah Community Center will remain open to the community during the holidays and throughout the evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 6, discussion items. The first one is 6.1, discussion of the fiscal year 2023 annual comprehensive financial report and other related reports for the year ended June 30th of 2023. For the benefit of the council, at least in my materials, that's pages 2 through 251. And I know we have our accountants here, and it will be not necessary to cover all 251 pages when you summarize your work here at the end of this little presentation. But I would like to sort of set the stage for the council, unless somebody objects. We have 3 items in terms of this discussion. I'd like to, Dr. Altman already knows that I have a problem with undirected discussion. So I'd like to suggest to council that we have the staff presentation, ask any questions you want of staff. There may be several, and perhaps of the city manager, and then we'll bring it back to the council table for discussion amongst ourselves. Any questions, obviously we can ask questions after that, but I sort of want to do it in that sequence so staff knows when they're on stage. City manager's on stage all the time, so he's going to have a series of questions, and then we'll try to decide where we want to go next and how we want to do things next. So please.
Director. Tonight, we're going to discuss the audit results for fiscal year ended June 30th, 2023. The city is required to have an annual audit. This is to review the finances and also the internal controls over financial reporting. The audit process takes a lot of work and effort by staff, and I want to thank our auditors, but also city staff who participated in the audit. I also want to extend a special thanks to Audrey Kincaid, who couldn't be here, for her hard work and being a leader, along with Justin Geiger throughout the process. I also want to thank Andrea Smith and Jennifer Lacoste for their work as well. This is Raymond's second year providing services to the city, and I'm going to turn it over to Doug and Jason now so they can walk you through the audit and answer any of your questions. Thank you.
So in other words, you're exiting the stage.
Yes, I am.
And allowing us to ask them all the questions. I just wanted to make sure I understood what the deal was here. Thank you, sir. Thanks for coming tonight, guys.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I am Doug Dieter with Raymond. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. I just want to touch on the reports that I handed out to you this evening and what each of them are. So this is the full audit report, the annual comprehensive financial report for the city for the year ending June 30, 2023. And now that we can't go page by page, we got to restructure our whole presentation. So we'll work on that as we go.
Okay.
The smaller document here is called the single audit report. This overview of the federal awards expended by the the city during the year, and the federal government requires a single audit in any year where the city expends more than $750,000. And this differs from the financial statement audit somewhat, that this focuses on the compliance of the federal awards. So if each federal award has certain criteria of what the money can be spent on. The federal government wants to know that the city expended it in accordance with those, with that criteria. The third document is on our letterhead, just stapled. This is some required communications by our profession between the auditors and the city council, and that's what that document is there. And the final document is a PowerPoint presentation that's going to summarize those 4 documents. Each of you have a printed copy in front of you. It's also going to be up on the screen. And so Jason is going to come up and go through this document for you. And again, if there's any questions, feel free to ask them at any point as we go through this. Or if there's something else you'd like to look at specifically in the audit report, we can do that as well.
I just want to clarify, so then you're going to go to the screen here?
Yes.
Okay.
But I think, right, you guys can be able to pull that up for us? Yep.
So as I go through the screen documents, I just want to make sure you're taking all of these numbers from city financial records, correct?
Yes.
All right,
that is
and
very
so
correct.
you're just demonstrating for us and the public what you glean from the city financial records as you go through this, and then you'll give us your opinion as to the credibility of the reports, for lack of better terminology. So
Yep.
that's what you're really doing tonight.
That is very correct. Yes.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So my name is Jason Salzwedel. I was the manager on the audit for the city of East Lansing. And as we kind of just discussed here, we're just kind of going to give you a high-level overview of primarily the general fund, which is the main operating fund of the city, and then also touch base on some of the enterprise funds of the city as well. But if you advance to the second slide in the presentation, and Penny had noted, there's a lot of responsibilities for the city in preparing for this audit, and we just kind of have noted a few of those here. Those key responsibilities being the preparation of the financial statements. While we assist the city in preparing the financials, all of the numbers that you see before you come from the city. The city is also responsible for designing and maintaining internal controls around their accounting processes, and then making all of those records available for external parties such as auditors. On to the second or third slide now. The responsibilities for the independent auditors is to issue an opinion on the financial statements and to plan and perform our audit, as well as communicate any findings we might have during that process. So in the big 250-page bound binder, or if you're looking at the agenda packet, I want to say it's page 24, that's where we provide our audit opinion. We issued an unmodified opinion on the city's financial statements, which is the best opinion that we can provide, meaning we didn't find any material misstatements or anything that would lead someone to question the validity of the numbers that are in the report. On to the next slide. This is a high-level overview of the assets that the general fund had. If you want to go one more. There we go. This is a high-level overview of what assets, liabilities, and then fund balance, which is basically if you paid all of your liabilities, what's left over of those assets would be the fund balance, is a way to think about that in the general fund. And again, this is a snapshot as of June 30th, 2023. This is condensed. There's more detail in the audit report, page 45 of the agenda packet, or if you're looking at the printed version, it's page 36. So the city had about almost $18 million in cash and investments, an additional $8.8 million in restricted cash. That's primarily the ARPA funds that were available at the end of June. So those have to be presented as restricted because the city, there's rules on what the city can use those funds for. About $10 million in receivables that could be broken down into $5.8 million in leases receivables, almost $2 million for income taxes, and then some amounts due from the state of Michigan, primarily for revenue sharing. Liabilities, so there's accounts payable and other accrued liabilities. That's going to be income tax refunds that are due, as well as just your normal payables from operations, as well as accrued payroll at the end of the year. Unearned revenue of $9.2 million. Most of that's the ARPA funds, so you can't recognize the revenue there until you spend those funds. So most of that there is the ARPA funds that are in that restricted cash in the asset section.
So those are ARPA funds that we're entitled to in toto, not only what we've already essentially received, but what remains in the queue for us?
So it would be just the ARPA funds you have on hand. So the 8.8 million in cash that's restricted,
Okay.
there's 8.8 in unearned revenue
Okay.
for that ARPA.
Thank you.
Yep. Deferred inflows of resources of 6.4. So that's basically future revenues that are going to be recognized in a different period in the fund. Most of that is related to leases receivable. Then we get down into the fund balance. Again, this is kind of if you paid all of your liabilities, what's left over for the city to use. You have some restricted funds there, and that most of that is for the income tax allocation that the city has. And then unassigned is kind of what's available for the city council to determine, what do they want to use those funds available for. They're unrestricted.
Okay, well, let me just stop you there. So the fund balance, another way of saying that is that's actually cash that we have that's available for us to spend at some point?
Well, it's going to be not necessarily cash. It's going to be assets minus liabilities.
Okay, well, I mean, are we talking motor vehicles? Are we talking buildings? What are the assets you're talking about?
It would be cash, receivables, prepaids, so those wouldn't be available for spending. Those are going to be up in the non-spendable section. The general fund doesn't recognize the long-term assets, so most of it's going to be future. If it's not cash, it will be cash at some point.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Eric.
The restricted cash number that you mentioned under assets, 8.8 million.
8.4, I think, isn't it?
Under assets,
Would be the 8.8.
8.8, right?
I'm in a different line, sorry, go ahead.
I think it was in connection with that line or the line after you mentioned, you had two numbers. One was, I think leases, and the other one was the income tax?
So that's in the receivables net.
Receivables, I'm sorry, yes. And you mentioned the income tax number was 2 million there?
1.9 million, yeah, roughly 1.92 million.
Where does it, so I'm very interested in the dynamics of the income tax, and I'm trying to make all the numbers add up. Where does that 2 million fit into the 16 million that we collect from the income tax?
So that would be income taxes that were filed that hadn't been paid yet as of June 30th.
Okay, so that's for 2020,
Or it would be related to withholdings.
for tax year 2023.
Yes.
Okay, that helps. What I don't want people to come away with thinking is that the income tax is bringing in $2 million, because that is not accurate.
I would have to go back. Income taxes for the whole year
Yeah,
was 16.5 million.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to differentiate. All right, thank you.
Yeah. On to the next slide. So this is a comparison of the general fund's revenues and comparing budget to actual. So you'll see, and we just had summarized, again, there's more detail in the actual financial statements, pulling out the biggest pieces: property taxes, income taxes, and intergovernmental from state sources. So that's going to be those revenue sharings that come from the state of Michigan. Most of those all came in relatively close to budget. The budget variance in the other categories primarily related to federal sources revenue, which that had a variance of around $360,000, and that's primarily related to ARPA projects that didn't happen, so you can't recognize the revenue for it until the project happens. And the other piece would be there were some under budget amounts for license and permits revenue. I believe there were some projects that wrapped up that happened in the city, so some of that revenue didn't come in as expected, which obviously that can fluctuate based on the construction projects that happen. Next slide.
Hang on, before you flip the page. So again, you understand we're trying to interpret this for ourselves and for the public. Okay?
Sure.
So just assume I'm the stupidest guy in the world, which is pretty close to a good assumption. So on this sheet, on that slide, you have a column that reads final budget, and I assume that's the budget that we adopted, correct?
Yeah, that would be the
Okay.
final one.
And
not
then actual budget is what actually transpired, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so, just because I'm the stupidest guy in the world, you say that we're under final budget by $1,148,033, correct?
Yes, in revenue.
Okay.
Yep.
That means we didn't spend $54,108,900, which is what we budgeted during this period, correct?
So this is all related to revenue, so there's no expenditures in here in this
Okay.
section.
So did we make money or lose money there?
Well,
The next
you were under budget for revenue, so you thought you were going to have more revenue
So
come
we
in.
collected less than we thought.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So on the next slide, we're going to be looking at the expenditures. So again, there's more detail in the financials. All these are going to be, there's more detail in the financials. You'll see the largest expenditure, which is going to be that gray slice of the pie there, is public safety, maybe primarily your police and fire. Public safety final budget numbers was about 30.5 million. Actual expenditures were 29 million, so under budget in expenditures of approximately 1.5 million. And that was due to some vacancies in various departments in there, as well as lower OPEB costs. I understand there were some retirees that opted out of the plan, as well as some decreases in the pension contributions that were made for that department. The other large under budget item for expenditures was general government. That primarily was related to, again, vacancies in various departments, as well as a lower conservative supplemental payment to the pension plan in comparison to what was budgeted. So here, you didn't spend as much as what you had planned.
Yeah, don't be going to that next page yet.
All right.
All right, so I'm going to go through the same set of questions. So here, it shows that this is expenditures, correct? This
Correct.
is the expenditure side of the ledger.
Correct.
All right. The sheet before was revenue, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Sheet before said that we thought we were going to get $54 million plus in revenue. We only got 52,000, almost 53 million in revenue, correct?
Correct.
All right, so now we have our expenditures. And we thought we were going to spend $57 million, and we only spent almost 53, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you're showing this as expenditures were 4.2 million under budget, correct?
Correct.
But if you compare that to the prior page, our actual revenue was 52,960,000, thousand plus, correct?
Yes,
And we actually spent 52,986,600, correct?
correct.
So we spent about $26,000 more than we brought in, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. And so what we just kind of walked through, I guess, is going to be kind of summarized on that next page.
Yeah, but I wanted to sort of do it my own way. So,
No, you're good.
Yeah, okay.
So again, the city initially had budgeted for a decrease in fund balance of approximately 3.1 million. What actually occurred was that decrease in approximately 26,000. So you guys did a lot better overall in actual compared to what was initially budgeted. If you were to look at the fund balance at the end of the year in comparison to 1 year's expenditures, the city has approximately 33% in the general funds fund balance. If you were to take 1 year's expenditures and compare that to what's there, there's 33%. The GFOA recommends the city have approximately 2 months or 17% in unassigned fund balance. So you guys are pretty close to that in the unassigned category, but over the 17 in totality.
And for the benefit of all of us, GFO is what?
It's the Government Finance Officers Association.
From whom? Who are they?
So it's a, bail me out here, Doug. It's a group, it's an organization made up of various members of municipalities.
Throughout the nation. Yeah.
So
What?
I'll take that one real quick. It is an organization that helps interpret and provide guidance on governmental accounting standards. And the city actually submits their audit report to this organization, and that organization puts it through a rigorous review and then provides a certificate to the city if they pass to say, yep, your audit report meets all the standards. So that the GFOA is that organization. They provide, like Jason said, this guidance on what a fund balance should be based on the normal, I shouldn't say normal, maybe average municipality, because everyone's going to be a little bit different based on their timing of their revenue flows, expenditure flows, that type of thing. But you know, they provide that guidance on the fund balance as a range. 17 is kind of the average. It's 15 to 20 is what they generally say, to ensure that you have enough funds available to cover costs in your revenue streams when they go up and down.
All right, I think I understand that. But so it's a private organization. It's not the state.
It's not the
federal
state.
government.
No.
Okay.
It's private.
And
Yep.
so you're using this 33%. The standard range that I'm aware of from other things I've done is within the teens. So are you saying, let's just say 15% hypothetically is according to the recommendations. When you're saying 33%, you're not saying we're twice what the recommended is.
No, and that's what Jason was alluding to, is that 33% is your total fund balance. GFOA looks at your unassigned. Remember, your fund balance is broken down in those different categories. You have about almost 8.4 million in restricted. So that's not available for other spending. So the GFOA is going to look at for that 15 to 20% is what you're unassigned, what hasn't been given a purpose yet, and what should that percentage be. So that is basically, that's going to cut that 33% down into almost half. Okay, so now you're at 16.5% roughly for an unassigned fund balance percentage.
And maybe I'm stealing your closing, but do you give us that figure anywhere in here? Because I didn't see it.
The 16.5? No, we didn't. No.
Okay. So the best estimate you can give us tonight is it's approximately half of this 33%?
I think the unassigned is like 16.1% or something. I want to say 17% would be like 8.8 million.
Okay, so in these figures someplace, there's going to be this 16.1.
No, it's not anywhere in our presentation. It
Okay.
was just
But-
So,
conversation.
but
the number
it's
is there.
Hang on, it's the unassigned is the one that we need to pay attention to, because that gives us the flexibility to meet some sort of emergency.
That's correct, and that's on slide 5, if you want to look back at that.
Okay.
That has the fund balance, different classifications, and you can see the unassigned is 8.1 million out of a total of 17.4.
Eric, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I was just going to point out that the unassigned is 8.1 million on slide 5.
Okay.
I just want, if I may follow up.
Please, go ahead.
Just the organization we were just talking about, it's essentially best practices for government.
Yes,
recommendations.
they establish a lot of best practices, different policies, procedures, and that type of thing for local governments, yes.
And then in terms of other relevant financial standing for the city, whether it's bond rating or other considerations, are those best practices included in some of the figures for talking points as we go through this presentation?
Well, I mean, we don't touch on bond ratings, that's totally outside the audit scope.
Okay.
But, I mean, there are a lot of other policies or suggested best practices, I guess you will, that the GFOA provides to local municipalities that participate in their program.
Okay.
And debt service is one of those best practices that they give guidance on for municipalities to follow.
Any other questions on number 8, slide 8?
No, sir.
All right, move on to the next slide. So that kind of concluded the overview of the general fund. Now we're going to move on to just a high-level review of the enterprise funds. These are the funds that operate mostly on charges for services and to cover their operating costs. So again, here's a breakdown of the assets, liabilities, and net position. So net position is broken down into 2 categories, being what's invested in capital assets. So that would be the actual vehicles or the infrastructure of these funds. So obviously that net position isn't available to cover future expenses as it's tied up in capital assets. And then the remaining part is the unrestricted portion on that.
Excuse
The
me.
anything on slide 9?
I'm sorry, man. I got your gun shy. Just keep
Yeah,
rolling.
no.
Just keep rolling.
All right, moving on to the next slide. So this is the high-level overview of the changes in revenues, expenditures, and fund net position of the enterprise funds. We had boxed out the operating income here. So this again is what are the operating revenues of those funds less the operating expenses. And obviously you want to see some sort of income there. You don't want to see those funds operating at a loss because that would mean you're not charging enough to cover the services or the expenses of those funds. And then just keeping in mind of what are the other cash flow items that you might have to cover here. So like the sewage system has non-operating expenses in relation to debt service. So there's $2.1 million in interest expense to cover costs of bonds for the infrastructure expansion. But there's also principal related to those that have to be covered that comes out of that operating income.
Can you give us the slide number as you go through?
Yep, so that's slide number 10.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to slide
Excuse
11.
Excuse me,
I have a
Dr.
question.
Altman has a
I'm
question.
sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're fine, go ahead.
So on slide 10, you have, okay, I get it, non-operating revenues, net, and then capital contributions. So capital contributions would be money that we're socking away to spend on
So
capital
that would
improvements in the future, for
So
example.
that would be, typically it's going to be like grant revenue that's used to purchase capital assets or some other funding to purchase physical capital.
So what I'm trying to get at is if the parking system has revenues that exceed its operating expenses, we might want to collect those revenues to save up to
Cor-
spend on something in the future.
Correct.
And where is that represented here? Is that the 607,000 in capital?
No, so that would be other revenues that came in. So there won't be like an expenditure or line item on this statement to cover future capital that the city might have to incur to either, expand parking or repair parking facilities. So those are things that are going to come out of that unrestricted net position on the previous slide.
So, Mr. Bellman, can you succinctly define for us what that $607,033 is?
I believe that was ARPA dollars that were used, Penny, right, for rehabilitation to the parking structures?
I am not sure, but we can get that.
Okay, but this is expended funds?
It's grant funding received from the federal government, and there is some from a local, I'm not sure local, it says local, but it's grant funds that were received by the city specifically earmarked for a capital asset project, which would be the parking structure for improvements to that.
So you don't know the answer to my question. You don't know if the money's been expended yet?
Yes, the revenue is there, it's been expended.
Oh,
Yes.
okay,
Yep.
all right, thank you.
So
Go ahead.
So I'm still trying to understand the difference between operating revenues and operating expenses. And the difference here is operating income, right? So for the parking system, the operating income is 1.4 million.
Yes.
That's what we're taking in.
Above
That
the
is above what
expenses.
we're spending.
Right.
Okay. And that money can just sit in the fund,
That's good.
right?
Yes, and to be used to cover future operating
Got
maintenance,
it. Okay, yeah, that's.
other
sort of what I was
expansion.
getting at. All right, thank you. And then if I could ask you to go back to slide 9, and I'm sorry that I'm.
No,
derailing
don't
you a little bit.
apologize, that's,
Yeah, all right, just keep talking. I struggle to understand why deferred outflows of resources are grouped together with total assets. And why deferred inflow of resources are grouped with total liabilities. Is there a short explanation you can give us for why those things are grouped together?
Do you have the detail on what those are?
So the deferred outflows of resources are, it's not an easy answer. It is money that went out that is for a future, represents expenses in a future period.
I get it. So we've got something coming to us down the line.
The expense is going to be recognized in a future period.
So
It's a deferred expense or bill.
Yes, it's basically a deferred expense. It mainly relates to your pension and retiree healthcare plans and the way governmental accounting standards says it has to be accounted for. So it is I like the way you explained it, a deferred expense. The deferred inflow, the other side, the one that underneath the liability, is a deferred revenue, basically. You're going to recognize that benefit, that revenue, in a future period. And again, that relates a lot to your pension and your retiree health care, as well as there is a new governmental accounting standards related to leases. So this fund has a lease revenue or a lease receivable that it expects to collect in the future. Well, it's not it's not something that's available right now, so it's offset with a deferred inflow of resources for the lease amount. I know it's confusing. I'm trying to explain it best I can, but it's something that's going to happen in the future. It's going to run through either revenue or expense in the future, if that helps.
Maybe.
Okay.
Let me try another angle on this. On that slide, you've got net position right toward the bottom, and then there's net investment in capital assets and then unrestricted. Add those two things and you get total net position,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Is it true that total assets plus deferred outflows of resources minus
Yes.
the sum of total liabilities and deferred inflow of resources equal your total net position?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So then my question is, I still don't quite understand conceptually why total assets and deferred outflows of resources are grouped together on one hand, and total liabilities and deferred inflow of resources are grouped together on the other hand.
What do you mean grouped together?
Grouped together meaning you add total assets plus deferred outflows of resources. Why do you add that in as opposed to subtracting it? And I think I'm almost there. I just need a little help.
It's because governmental accounting standards are screwy. How's that? Governmental accounting standards is defined a deferred inflow as something other than an asset, okay? They're not an asset, but they're similar. And that's why they're accounted for, in this, you group them together to get to your net position. Same with the deferred inflows. It's not a liability, but the standards say they're similar to a liability.
And could you explain how they're similar to a liability?
Okay, so let's use it for another example maybe. So in the general fund, we saw unearned revenue as a liability. So you've received this grant funding from ARPA mainly. You have the cash, but you haven't spent it yet. And you need to spend it before you can recognize the revenue. Okay? So it's a deferral, and it'll be recognized as revenue in a future period. This is along the same lines where it's a deferral. You can't recognize the revenue and expense this year because of some reason. You're going to recognize it in a future period.
Okay, so I get the idea of deferred.
Okay.
Let's look at total assets plus deferred outflows, right? So when I see asset, I think of something that's good, right? It's something that we have.
Yep.
But then a deferred outflow is something that we're giving away, so I see that as bad. So why do you combine those two?
Deferred outflow, you could kind of tie that into a prepaid. So when you pay for your insurance, you might pay for it a year in advance, okay? But you don't recognize that expense until you recognize so much expense every month throughout that year. You don't recognize the expense when you pay it. So that's considered a prepaid asset, okay? So it's not a bad thing, it just means the money's already gone out the door and you don't have that money to spend anymore.
But you have the insurance now.
But you have the insurance now.
And
correct.
that's why it counts as an asset.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Does that help?
And that's according to the governmental standards.
Correct.
Which were significantly modified or changed in the last 10 years. I don't know if they were on this, but there were a lot of changes to this, right?
In the last 20, give you an example since you brought that up.
I don't need an example.
You don't want to, okay. Okay.
Thanks.
But yes, you're right. Lots
Doug
of
was
change.
just getting going.
And this is all has to do with what governmental accounting standards says has
Yeah,
to be there.
and so if Dr. Altman or any of us would like the reference to the big book of standards, you can get that reference to the city manager and he can get it to us so we can look at it ourselves and further misunderstand what's going on.
Yes.
Okay.
If I also just point out, on the slide deck, it shows what pages of this document has greater detail.
That was
Of
going
those
to look,
numbers.
yeah, okay,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
yeah.
So you can look at exactly what makes up the deferred outflows and deferred inflows.
Which will result in exactly the same questions for me, but, okay. Go ahead, guys.
All right, so on to.
They didn't tell you that this was going to be a walk in the park in East Lansing, did they? I mean, it's only your second year.
That's what he told me. This was going to be
Yeah,
super
I know.
easy.
He said, yeah. He says, you go ahead and do this one.
Yeah.
I'll just be there to back you up.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know.
He initially was like, you just go by yourself.
Yeah.
And
That's when I was in the big law firm and I was the guy that carried the bag. Oh, this will be easy, you know. And then the judge crucified me. So go ahead. You're doing a great job. Thank you for
All right,
coming.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. So on slide 11, this is going to be kind of a look back of the last 5 years of the MERS pension plan. So the city has a pension plan for employees, and this is a look at what that liability was as of December 31st in the corresponding years. So the total liability and then plan net position, that basically means the assets that are available to pay that liability, which net to the net pension liability. So total liability minus plan net position equals the total pension liability. And then there's a percentage to show what is the percentage of the plan net position to the total pension liability. So as of December 31st, the city had approximately 55.6% of its pension plan funded.
Okay, Mr. Bellman, rather than make these guys try to explain this, all of us get questions from our constituents all the time about the pension liability, and we're not going to answer all those tonight, and we're not going to solve that tonight, but could you please give us your paragraph explanation as to the changes in the last 2 or 3 years in terms of our net position of total pension liability? And let me indicate to you that it was suggested to us, I can't remember if it was you guys or our bond people last year or earlier this year, that our position was going to not be as good because of changes in the market, but maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. So can you give us a brief overview of that for the public, please? Mr. Bellman.
So, so our investments and the return on those investments through MERS is attributed to whether we have a good year or a bad year, and as well as they do a reassessment of their assumptions every 3 to 5 years. And so they look at the rate of return on our investments. It used to be 7.5, well, it used to be 8, went down to 7.5, then 7.3, and now they're assuming only a 7% return. So when they calculate those returns, as well as how long people are living beyond what they originally assumed, we need more dollars set aside to pay for those guaranteed pension payments for the employees and/or spouses, depending on if.
Okay, any questions on that? Dr. Altman.
There was, I can't remember exactly where I read it in the document, but there was an accounting rule change for 2022, was there not? Was that GASB 68 or something that basically
It's the leases that came into play, right?
So for this year, the accounting change would have been GASB 96 for subscription-based IT arrangements.
Yes.
Which you mentioned in one of the pages in here, I think, or somebody mentioned.
That's right.
Yeah, I believe
You
so.
make a note of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do any accounting rule changes contribute to our total liability across the years 2018 to 2022 on this slide?
So there would have been changes with pension, pension assumptions. So as Robert was mentioning, the total pension liability, that is determined by the actuaries. So as assumptions change, that number could go up and down depending on life expectancies,
Performance of the market.
Yeah.
I don't think that's Dr. Altman's question. Let me see if I can rephrase it. I think his question is, during the years that he indicated, has there been a change in the general governmental accounting standards that would affect the analysis in these years? And I think the answer to that question is no.
In these years, no.
Okay. Was that your question?
Yeah, approximately. And the context for this is I seem to remember from before that we were warned that there were going to be some accounting changes in the pipeline that were going to add substantially to our liability without changes in the market or any of these other variables, that they were essentially recognizing a new liability that they hadn't recognized before.
And I think that goes back to when Mayor Bernero was in office and there were significant changes, I'm guessing 2012, 2010, along in there?
Pension standards went into effect in 2015.
Okay.
When all this started, where the city had to record this huge liability. I know last year we talked about some changes in the assumptions that the actuary is using. That was going to impact and increase your total liability. But there is no new professional accounting standards that impacted this in the last 5 years.
And that was your question, right?
That was my question.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for bringing that up, though. Okay, keep rolling.
All right, on to the next slide. This is
Which is number?
Number 12.
12, thank you.
This is a comparison of the actuary determined contributions. So the actuaries, they determine how much the city needs to contribute to make sure they're meeting their ongoing to cover that legacy cost. And then the blue line is the amount that the city actually contributed. So in the past few years, the city has contributed more than what the actuaries had said was the minimum amount to contribute. On to slide 13.
I'm sorry, I have a question about the slide you're just on. When the actuaries determine the minimum contribution, do they do so with an eye to keeping that minimum contribution stable over time for the city, or do they pay any attention to that? In other words, if we paid just the minimum year to year, could we expect those required contributions to be stable, or do we have no prediction about whether they're going to go up or down? What I'm worried about is paying our minimum credit card payment and then having our balance go up over time.
Right, so I think that could fluctuate based on changes in assumptions, where if the liabilities would shoot up, you would have to, there would be increased contributions in the future to make sure you're meeting those requirements.
I'll go, and then if I-
Yeah, let's define who the actuary is in this case. The actuary is the state of Michigan, correct?
Well, it's through the Michigan
hire a
Employee
firm.
Retirement.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, I'm
They
wrong.
hire a separate
It's not
actuary.
the state, but it's the state. So Dr. Altman's question is directed at the actuaries that do these assumptions who are with the pension system.
That is correct.
Okay, and so go ahead,
So my
please.
point is that MERS adopts a policy to smooth, I think it's a 5-year smoothing now, it used to be 10, so that you don't see those rapid variations in the required contribution. So if your plan is performing better because of investments, you will not realize the full effect of that benefit except over a portion of 5 years, so that you don't see the spikes. So they do try to level out your annual required contributions based on a 5-year smoothing.
And do we know how MERS is performing versus other similar, whether that's in other states, other similar plans?
I haven't looked, but I'm sure there's data out there. MERS has in its own organizational plan show how they're performing compared to assumptions, and they historically have outperformed their assumptions even in bad markets. The thing that East Lansing has to recognize is that we started getting better in addressing our unfunded liability when we went to a defined contribution plan, and then we embraced the hybrid. The hybrid is putting additional pressure on our unfunded liability because now we've kind of reopened the plan that we closed previously. And so that's some of, when I glanced at these documents last night, that's some of the pressures that we're experiencing. That's some of why the income tax isn't buying down the unfunded liability as rapid as everybody anticipated. So that's something I'm going to invite MERS in to have a specific discussion with you about our assets and our liabilities and what our plan does and how the hybrid is impacting our ability to pay down the unfunded liability.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay. Slide 13. This is a similar table, but it relates to the retiree health care plan. So again, total liability, which is determined by a different actuary. Plan net position, what are the assets to cover that liability, leaving a net liability number. So very similar scenario as the pension, approximately 55% as of December 31st, 2022. On to slide 14. Again, the orange column is the contributions that were determined by the actuary. Blue column is what the city has contributed over the past years. Slide 15. So this kind of moved on out of the very large binder into the small bound book, which covers the federal expenditures and the related compliance to those awards. So for the year ended June 30th, 2023, the city expended $18.6 million in federal awards. We audited the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Cluster, and issued unmodified opinions on compliance with those, meaning we didn't have any issues or any compliance items noted in our audit. That's all I have. I do just want to thank Penny, Audrey, and Justin, and the rest of the finance department. As Penny had noted, it's a lot of work to go through this process, trying to keep up with their daily duties as well as answer questions and get us stuff that we need. So we really appreciate their efforts in that.
Any further questions for, go ahead. Go ahead.
Question on, has the healthcare defined benefit had any changes over the last few years for the city?
I want to say it was closed, but I don't know what year. You're talking about retiree health.
Yep.
Yes. I don't believe there's been any modifications to the actual benefits. If that's what.
And it's closed now?
I believe it's closed to new hires.
Okay.
And I don't remember what year.
Not that I'm reading city employee faces as you're speaking, but.
I can tell you when I was hired, I was not offered retiree health.
There
So
we go.
I know that the city has closed it. I just don't know when exactly the city closed it. I think they joined other municipalities throughout the state to start closing those benefits down.
All right.
Ms. Watson, any questions?
Just for the single audit, did you choose it, or did we choose, or how were those two funds chosen?
So the federal government basically has standards that we have to follow, and we pick those programs based on those guidelines that they establish on how those programs should be selected.
Dr. Altman?
Yeah, I have a question about deep into the details of the report on page 170. If someone happens to have the document in front of them. And the question is, it's about the income tax. And again, I'm trying to sort of wrap my head around where we are with the income tax these days. And this is that page is a breakdown of tax returns separated by resident taxpayers and non-resident taxpayers, which is interesting for lots of reasons. And my question is that the total returns in tax dollars is 9.8 million there, which differs substantially from the 16.4 million. How do we get from 9.8 to 16.4?
So I believe the main difference there is going to be calendar year versus fiscal year. So this is going to be based on the tax year 2022, and then the 16 million is going to be from July 1st through June 30th. So they're different time periods. They won't line up.
And this 9.8 million has got to be a shorter time period. Like it's January 1st through June 30th?
No, it'd be January 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2022. So one thing I think is to consider is the city, income tax is new for the city, so you have non-filers. There's a lot of different variables that go into the differences between that period before versus this period.
$6 million worth of differences?
Well, let me just, the document you're looking at is a city document, not your document.
Correct. We didn't audit
Okay, so I just
this.
wonder if, I love the questions, but I wonder if they're really not the persons to answer it, because it's a city financial analysis thing. So, I mean, go ahead if you want, but I think we're putting him in kind of a tough spot because he's interpreting a document that he didn't generate, so go ahead.
I just want an answer to the question. I don't need it to come from you. I just would like it from somewhere. It just seems like a very big difference to me. $6 million doesn't.
Yeah, I know the city they have records of their monthly incomes for that, so I would have to defer some of this to the finance department.
Mr. Bellman, can you answer that question?
Actually, I can. I don't know if Penny can.
I will have to get back with you with the details of this report.
Okay. Could you do that by our next regular meeting, please, the two of you? Dr. Altman, will that work?
Yeah, that's great. And what I'm trying to get at is, you know, the income tax is going to sunset in not that many years, and we have to figure out what it's buying us.
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're getting at.
So-
Yeah, let's get the data. Go ahead.
I did want to add that I went back and looked at the estimates from the financial health team that we convened years ago now, probably about 6 years ago. And the estimates of net revenue from the income tax are going to be, or total revenue from the income tax are going to be about $10 million. And so the 16 million that we seem to be bringing in is substantially higher than we had estimated. Just don't want that to get lost.
Anything further from you? Just while you're at the podium, I just want to direct your attention to slide number 12 and slide number 14. And these are your documents, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to confirm my understanding. On slide number 12, you have a representation of the pension contributions that the city has made. And in 2022 and 2023, the city made pension contributions far in excess of what the actuaries' suggested contribution was, correct?
Correct.
And the same thing holds true on slide number 14 for the retiree health contributions. In each of those years, the city made contributions in excess of what the actuarially determined contribution
Correct.
was, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming tonight, guys.
And thank you
Like
very
I
much.
always say,
Appreciate it.
I apologize for all the questions, but actually I don't, so, but
Not a problem.
happy holidays.
Good questions. Thank you.
Okay, anything further on this topic? We'll move ahead to item 6.2, discussion of American Rescue Plan approved and available funding.
Thank you. We're here to talk about ARPA funds that have been approved, and then also that we have just over $5 million left to approve in projects. So the city received over $12.1 million of federal funding for ARPA. In 2021, there were several discussions by council on how to use the funds. This was also discussed as part of the fiscal year 23 budget process. Out of the discussions, the council has approved 5 resolutions, and those total just over $7 million. The spreadsheet you have is, well, first, the single sheet is listing all of those projects approved by resolution and how much they were estimated to be. And then the spreadsheet that has the green shading, this is organized by strategic priority that was determined during your FY23 budget process. The green shading are those approved by resolution, and the white rows or lines are what are potential projects that were identified as a result of leadership, department leadership discussions coming together to have group discussions on potential projects. There's also on the second page at the bottom, there are 3 other potential projects that were also discussed. But the ones that are part of the main document are, excuse me, they total $12.2 million with the approved ones, and that leaves 127 that we would be short if you approved all of the projects that are out there. As of right now, there is 5.2 in potential projects, though.
So, if I may, let's just walk through. So I will highlight what we're asking you to consider in January and formally approve, because you can't approve tonight. But I want to be able to walk through what I worked with staff in trying to identify direct benefits to the general fund, because that's where primarily the revenue loss was. with an exception to the parking fund. And then to where our residents will benefit because we're providing some additional resources to offset future expenses. And I'll get into greater detail as we walk through. So on this lined spreadsheet you have in front of you, I'm only going to highlight the white sections because the green colored sections have already been approved by prior councils. And so some of those projects have been implemented. And as Penny
Or started,
indicated,
yeah.
that the estimates were adjusted to give some additional dollars to be allocated to the new projects that we want to go over tonight.
Mr. Brumman, can you pull your microphone just a little closer?
I can.
Can you also?
I leaned into it.
Okay.
Thank you. Mayor, yes, I will.
So, under enhanced transportation and infrastructure, which I believe is truly good governance, is a request from the fire department to create a fire training facility, estimated cost $210,000. It would be an expense out of the general fund, and that's the reason why recommending as part of ARPA to pay for this expense. It allows the chief and the firefighters and staff to train on site because they can't get away to other regional training facilities due to increased call volumes. And so they want to make sure they maintain their proficiency in their areas of expertise. And so this will allow them to do that. If you have any questions, Chief Carson is here to answer those questions. Going down to environmental sustainability. DPW is recommending the retention pond drains at the fire station / Taylor be addressed at $320,000. I believe that's Fire Station 1, correct? Yes. So there's a lot of ponding that occurs on the property directly adjacent to the fire station, making that area unusable. And so we would address some of that through the use of these dollars. Correct, Scott?
Yeah, so we've been talking with Eagle about improving stormwater infrastructure. And as we talk about this, this might be a hard project to execute as we assess it with our partners there. Really, we need a stormwater utility here.
Yeah.
Which fire station is this? So we have drains that go through.
No, which, the location?
Station 1, Abbott.
Abbott, what I call the mainstay, okay.
Right.
And where are the ponds?
So you have that drain so that's not a natural creek. That's a drain that flows through there into some
Behind
waters.
the station?
Through and around through the neighborhood, and when during high water events, you can see the impact.
I get it, thank you.
Go ahead.
Scott, were you saying that we can't actually do this because we need a stormwater utility?
Well, no, what our challenge is, so this is an emerging thing, not to slow this down. The permitting process is proven very difficult. But this is a symptom of a bigger problem that we need a stormwater utility to maintain stormwater infrastructure. That's our missing leg of the stool in infrastructure.
And the drain commissioner doesn't help with this?
Separate, because they have their jurisdictional drains, we have our own city drains and infrastructure that needs to be maintained.
So are we talking about,
Go ahead.
are we talking about a stormwater utility? Is this something that's going to happen?
I'm just planting a seed.
Okay.
Yeah, ultimately, we need to have that conversation in a future discussion.
Okay, all right.
But the permitting for this particular thing is through the state or
Yes,
through?
through Eagle.
Okay.
And it's very painful.
More painful than the drain commissioner?
Drain commissioner can go and clean whatever they want. We have to spend thousands of dollars and do environmental assessments.
Yeah, you don't get my, you don't get my drift.
Yeah,
on
no,
that.
I know what you're saying, but yes.
You can't leverage the drain commissioner or his taxing authority.
We would have to, if we wanted to use the drain commission, we'd probably have to turn the drains over to him.
So don't run, because the next two under environmental sustainability, one is DPW solar, ground only, 1.1 million with 800,000 from 800,000 ARPA, 220 approved above, right? It's about 580,000 coming from ARPA. to help put solar out at DPW, to help reduce our use of electricity, and to embrace our sustainability policy here in East Lansing.
If I might just interrupt you, so what you're going to do now is you're going to go through every one that's in white?
Yes,
Okay, and then you're coming back to us in December? And
in January.
or
the
excuse
formal
me,
meeting.
January.
Yes.
And you're going to recommend that we approve these
That
with
is
regard to ARP? Okay.
I have a question. Do we have like what the ROI or what the expectation of rate decrease would be?
So, the bar napkin math on that without the cost, capital costs, it can be as little as 7 to 8 years. It just depends on the cost of solar panels. And depends if we use battery backup. The goal is to add resiliency to the facility, and then when we're at peak production during the day, sell energy back to the grid, and that would generate additional revenue.
Next one is water meters. So the overall cost of the project is pretty expensive, and we're looking to use about $1 million to help relieve ratepayers of the cost of doing water meter replacements throughout the city of East Lansing.
I have a question on that front. Why do we want to relieve ratepayers?
So we're looking at a bill about ranging $5 to $7 million to upgrade and renew our water meters infrastructure, to include reading, advanced meter infrastructure to tell people about leaks so they don't get high water bills. It'll improve our revenue capture. So everything, water meters are like all other pieces of infrastructure that have a finite life. And we're at the point where we're starting to have systems that are becoming obsolete and harder to maintain. So we're looking at a wholesale renewal of those. We were looking at pursuing the SRF project for doing that, but we were not competitive enough for that. And that's where we're looking at discussing ARPA, providing some relief, and doing a cash-funded project over several years. And that will be part of the next discussion as well, because these are some of the big bills and how to tackle that. And this provides relief both on the water and sewer fund, because the water meter is what we use as a basis to bill for sewer as well.
So here's the context for my question. So I don't doubt the need for the expenditure. We don't have any surplus money, right, in our general fund. We have a tight budget situation. And that seems to me to mean that if we have other expenditures that we can cover through other means, like water rates, we should try to do that. And the more general version of that comment is, do we really want to be subsidizing enterprise funds with this money?
I appreciate that, and that was part of our discussion, but I think when you're looking at a $5 million price tag on the water fund alone, and some of the sewer improvement projects that'll be coming down the capital improvement plan down the pike, so to speak, I think the water and sewer rates are going to go up substantially. And so when you look at residents' ability to pay taxes on top of utility rates, the idea is to try to help offset some of those costs with these dollars that were never intended to, be long-term revenue. Ultimately, it's up to this body. Our recommendation is to take a portion of our $12.1 million from the feds that we have to spend by 2026 and reduce some of the costs on the utility ratepayers. I understand the philosophy. I've had the same thing, but again, when you look at some of the projects that we have to fund on the sewer side, rates are going to go up substantially in the near future.
I think what would be helpful in this context is, and we had a quick sidebar before the meeting started this evening, is we have our long-term infrastructure needs, and understanding the timed projects, like almost a Gantt chart and cost over time. I think I think in consideration of what you want to prioritize, because I feel similarly from a philosophical place that Councilperson Altman just indicated with these enterprise funds. So I think that way, so we can grasp the priority you're recommending, I think that would be helpful context.
Okay.
We can show the projected rate calculations with or without this as well.
Yeah,
over
because
time.
it's essentially like a smart meter for electric, but
Right.
this is for water.
That's good.
So it does help conserve water. I'm trying to play to Dr. Altman's,
But, I mean, again, it's where you want to utilize these limited dollars, whether it's for use in the general fund or to, in this case, benefit our residents by reducing a portion of the impact of the infrastructure improvements made to water and sewer.
well, but also the mayor made the point earlier that we're living outside our means in the general fund,
Slightly.
slightly, but you.
Well, I mean, we only, so pointed out that our intended use of fund balance in 2023 was just over $3 million. We actually only used 25,000 because a lot of it was bringing these projects in or fund balance in to cover some of these projects, and we didn't end up spending all of that fund balance. So yes, there are times we budget outside of our means, but because of open or vacant positions or costs don't come in as high as we anticipated, our actual use of fund balance is less. So
Yeah.
again, philosophically, yes, you could use this to benefit a general fund project, and we have those in here. There may be others that you might want to embrace, but we have to identify those pretty quickly because our time clock is running on us to expend these dollars, and every time debt service ceiling negotiations, these unused portions of ARPA keeps getting clawed back by the feds,
We don't want that.
and we don't want that.
Well, I would just ask that you do one thing, Mr. City Manager, which is, I understand the discipline you're applying here, but I guess I thought that we were going to maybe take a step back here, and so and the staff did a ton of work on this the last year and a half, and I appreciate it. But it seems to me what we're dealing with here is, I think, a finite list. And so if there's any way that you and staff, I'm not talking about a 5-day retreat, but if there's any way you and staff can mull over whether there are some other things that would be alternatives to these, I think it would be helpful to the council, and I assume the council will be looking at other possibilities too, to have the list of some other things that maybe you and staff think might be something we could switch to. So that's all.
Absolutely, and I'm happy to do it. I mean, one thing comes to mind, and we've talked about it briefly individually, but not as a group, and that is the future of City Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Exactly.
I mean, because
That's-
that'll
yeah.
have a hefty price tag.
That's
And-
not exactly where I'm going, but if
But
you
I
guys wanna
understand
put that
that.
on the list, fine.
But I mean, that comes to mind where those are some of the projects that you see that fell off this list and are at the bottom of the spreadsheet on improvements that need to be made to the current facility. But if we're looking to relocate or whatever, why throw good money after bad at a facility?
Okay.
So, but yes, we can continue to have further discussion on big picture investments using these dollars, if not towards trying to reduce the utility rates.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I was wondering with the water meters, is that going to walk us towards monthly bills?
If the new meters, that would be a possibility, and that would be a great option. The only cost increase would be postage, but it's much nicer to get a monthly bill versus a quarterly bill for home budgeting.
The other benefit of this upgrade of this technology is they can do real-time reads. So when students are checking out, they don't have to send a staff member out to read the meters. They can do it automatically on the day that student is leaving their rental unit and give them the bill that needs to be charged.
And the only other challenge with the water fund, we're facing unexpected costs from the lead and copper rule. We're doing a lot of inventory, a lot of line replacement. We are not getting any relief from that. That could be, for the next coming year's budget, fiscal year 25, we're looking at doing a large project that could be upwards of $3 million. That's going to wipe out, a large main replacement, and that's coming out of our ratepayers.
I do want to, I know we touched on this during the meeting at City Hall for the orientation, and I just want to bring up the point And I know the feds were gonna move up by the date, I think.
They did.
Faster. Did they attach any funding?
No.
Or is it all?
No, it's all on.
Okay, because this is one thing that I know, yes, the dollars flow through the state, but we have a federal delegation that we should always leverage. But it may be past that point at this juncture.
Well, I think any point you can go to the legislature and try to get special appropriations, be it at the state or the federal.
Yeah.
But grant dollars, because they give them to the state, they make them competitive, and because of our income level, we're no longer as competitive in some of these funding
Right.
opportunities.
Okay, let's keep going.
So the other one, under good governance, moving down, is courts are looking to replace digital recording system in their courtrooms for $135,000. DEI has a proposal for racial healing and community transformation of $215,000. I have additional documents to share with you that you can look at between now and January to have a better understanding. It was done in Kalamazoo, it was done in Lansing, and so there's some opportunity to do it here in East Lansing. Under recreation and cultural opportunities, parks, for the Hannah Community Center, replace the pool air handler for $152,800. That includes engineering. Soccer complex is resurface and expand the parking lot, $625,000. Again, these are special funds, so they're not general fund, but again, it provides us an opportunity to make capital improvements to these services that the fund may not be able to do on its own. Another request to boiler replacement at Hannah for $180,000, and roof area replacements or repairs at Hannah for $325,000. Under vibrant economy and development, there are 3 listed. Parks for virtual meeting access, so a portion of this $250,000 you've already approved to upgrade virtual meeting access upstairs. We're looking at doing it in other locations here in the building. Annette has down for planning, building and development, Charles Garage elevator modernization. If you recall, during the budget process, this was requested. It was incorporated to the budget, but never formally approved as a use of ARPA by council. So we're bringing it back in January for your formal authorization to use $700,000 for the elevator replacements in the Charles Garage. And then the last item listed is DPW for barricades, $600,000. This is in response to all of the special event requests and us to provide various barricades to limit threat to those that are gathering in our streets or areas around the city.
Any questions? Dr. Altman?
I have a question about one of the items in green. On the first page, which is the last one under enhanced transportation infrastructure, the $1.5 million to renovate the 3rd floor of this building, which it looks like we've spent very little of that at this point. And my question is, do we really want to do that? And that's in connection, in part, to the question about what do we do about City Hall? And maybe it makes sense to renovate the 3rd floor here if we end up moving City Hall into this building.
I don't think this building could house City Hall effectively.
And that may well be. But I'm thinking ahead to December 31st, 2030, which is when the income tax, as currently adopted in the charter, sunsets. That's not that many years from now. And based on my memory of the trade-offs that we worked through before the citizens of East Lansing adopted the income tax, if we had not adopted the income tax, we were not going to own this building anymore. Because if that income tax sunsets and we don't replace that revenue, we are looking at a drastically downsized city government. And it's just not clear that we can afford to maintain this building. So And that's, as I say, as I keep harping on, that's not that many years away from now. And spending $1.5 million, unless it's exactly the right space for some sort of use,
So
seems to me to be a bit of a risk.
I agree there's a risk. I wasn't aware of not being able to renew the income tax would impact the operation of the Hannah Center. But the Primetime Senior Program is constantly demanding additional space. We could be renting additional space, generating money that would make this more self-sufficient and self-supporting. So that's why using some of these ARPA dollars, again, as a portion of the cost to renovate that third floor. The biggest expense, of course, is that exterior fire escape system, as well as some of the improvements. But Kathy DeChambeau and I have talked about the first step is, if we're looking at the third floor, we should bring somebody in to analyze how we're using the space in this building, and are we leveraging the space to the best of our ability for all of the programs that are happening here. So I don't know, Kathy, you want to add some to that?
Right. I just wanted to say, we are exploring other options as well for this building. We did apply for the Michigan Community Center grant. There's no guarantee that we'd receive funding, but we did include the exterior egress that is required in order to utilize the third floor for the public in that grant, along with other items for the building. It will not renovate the entire third floor, and really the cost of that third floor renovation will be very contingent on how extensive that renovation is. So when we initially looked at this, and we had some drawings rendered over a year ago, those cost estimates came in pretty high, more than the 1.5 by quite a bit. But we were also really changing the footprint of the third floor. If we were to scale that back, that space would still be very usable for the programs that are asking for more space and for rental space and meeting space. And so we could do it at a lesser cost. But the reason we haven't spent, other than the architecture fees for these initial drawings and some estimate of cost, is that this was put on hold some months ago. And so we have not been pursuing this, and now the conversation is back at the table, so.
It would be very useful, I think, assuming we want to continue this conversation, which is fine with me, to have some more analysis of the potential benefits, right? Sure. In terms of rentals, or, you know, is there some group within our community that we could house there that it would be the perfect space for them, right? These sorts of considerations, I think, would weigh heavily with me, and probably with everybody, and I think it would be useful to have that analysis before we decide what to do. I mean, I understand we've already decided what to do, but then it's put on hold.
Correct.
But not officially, because the policy resolution is still in force.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So it sounds like we're going to have to talk about this one way or another anyway, coming up.
We will, and if we're successful at obtaining those grant dollars, that will help cover a
Yep.
substantial portion.
Absolutely.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah.
Dana, go ahead, please.
So I understand that the money needs to be spent by 2026. How are we going to get updates, like the unspent dollars, for example? Like, how do I know that it's going to be spent, or that prices haven't gone up, or that maybe some of those dollars could be shifted somewhere else?
So the estimates, the project totals were updated recently with better estimates. So it was 7.3 million, it's now 7, just over 7. Those amounts, 324,000, were actually now considered available to reallocate. The next update on expenditures will be in January. We have to report to the federal government every quarter, so we'll have updates and we can share that with you in the first part of January.
More importantly, once you've given the final blessing to these dollars, staff will be working very aggressively to ensure that we are engaging, if it's a contractor or the services, that we're doing it quickly. Everybody knows the timeline, that the monies have to be committed by December of 2024 and spent by 2026. And so that's what this discussion was about tonight.
Well, so when you say the monies have to be spent, does that mean that we pay people ahead of time before the, because
No,
my
so
understanding
the-
from other municipalities is there's a logjam on all this stuff. I mean, we're behind the 8 ball here.
Yeah, so the money has to be committed by the end of 2024 calendar year.
Yes.
And then spent by the end of 2026.
Okay, but
So some of the guidance, if I
Yeah.
may, some of the guidance are, if you have a contract for a service,
Correct.
will count as being spent. The other option is, because this is revenue laws, we can just incorporate these dollars into our general fund budget and government services, so police and fire. And then we would save money from millages that would then fall to fund balance, be used at a later time.
Okay,
So
I-
there's opportunities to make sure we'll spend this money before
I
2026.
believe what you're telling me, but I guess I'd like to see something in writing that shows me where somebody has in fact said this, that, or the other thing, and the council can count on that, okay?
I'll give you the
If you
final,
can- If you can get us something,
Yeah,
I'd
rules
appreciate
out
it.
of the fence.
Before the conversation we have in January on
Sure.
these. Go ahead.
Is it gonna be January 9?
I'm sorry?
Are we discussing this January 9th?
well, that's up to you. So if you
Awesome.
want it on January 9th or the second meeting, again, it depends on what our discussion was tonight, what additional information you're asking for. So will depend on whether it hits the 9th or the subsequent.
Well, I mean, I don't know what else you've got planned for the agenda, but I mean, I think all of us feel the need to get rolling on this. So my preference would be we get it on the 9th unless there's something else going on that's going to consume 3 hours. So,
Well,
go ahead.
I think it's important, both, and this, we're doing this together. We heard from the auditor, we've heard from Penny this evening in terms of budget, long-term fiscal health in coordination with our strategic plan and selection on how we best use the ARPA dollars. That's a lot, because I think we need to pull together documents that are dispersed in various places in terms of this income tax fiscal cliff. I don't know if we want to use that type of language, for the long-term fiscal health. We have, I'm pointing at you, Scott, only because, I know that there's going to be infrastructure needs day in, day out for years to come. How do those plot out over the next decade? And then there's the priorities that you've recommended. Is there ROI, like I'm saying smart meters only for shorthand for the water proposal, but as examples. So to me, some sort of document would be helpful in my decision-making in terms of our next conversation. So if we want to do that on January 9th, or if we're having a separate session on strategic planning in terms of, there's a lot of things that are hitting in terms of our economy and what's in the future here. And I understand the ARPA deadlines and what needs to be spent and created. So I know there's a high stakes in terms of the work. So I just wanted to highlight what would be helpful for me in the decision-making process.
Yeah, I mean, look, unless somebody says they don't want to do it, I think we ought to get it on the agenda for the 9th. Obviously, we always have the ability at that time to defer it after we've had a discussion if we don't have enough answers on things or if there's other planning we need to do. So I just want to sort of keep the ball rolling here. I mean,
Yeah, it's a good idea.
that's all I want to say on this topic.
So if I may, I think we have for the discussion-only meeting, and maybe it's a weekend, for strategic planning by this body in January, was our discussion during orientation, is to do some form of strategic planning so that it will help guide not only this ARPA discussion, but help guide the budget's preparation for FY '25. And so I don't know how fast we can pull together some of the analysis that you're asking for about HANA or about the utility projects and the impact on utility rates and whether you want to commit $1 million to help reduce some of that impact. we will have it on the 9th if we get that data. If we don't, it'll be on the 2nd January city council
Well,
meeting.
no, I guess maybe I'd characterize it differently. I would like it to be on the 9th, and I think the sense of the body is they want it on the 9th. And you and the staff can try to assemble the data you can get for the 9th. And if the council is not satisfied at that point that it has enough information, and that it can make that decision, it can defer it to a later date and give you
Okay.
more time. So
All right.
well, let me just say this. I've been concerned for the last year that we haven't had this discussion. And so I think it's high time we have this discussion and we move it ahead. I fully acknowledge what people are saying about getting the additional data, blending it into long-term planning. All that is true. But I don't want to tuck it away in a little cubbyhole for another 5 or 6 weeks while we go wandering around getting this data and that data, and then it sort of gets lost in the shuffle. I do not want to lose this in the shuffle again. Is my point clear?
Absolutely.
Does anybody object?
I don't.
Okay, let's move on to the next agenda
I'm
item.
sorry, I have more questions.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Geez, I thought I was kind of like
No.
wrapping it up. It's a
No,
closing
sorry.
argument.
Mr. Bellman, you said something about the virtual meeting access, and it sounded like you said we had already spent some dollars on virtual meeting access, or did I miss?
So the council's already approved a portion of that 250,000 to be deployed in the, what's it called, the room upstairs?
The executive conference.
The
room
executive
upstairs.
conference room. So it goes hand in glove to our discussions on the ability to broadcast other boards and commissions less expensive than we do for city council. And I know you've emailed me, Councilmember Watson, regarding the use of Zoom. I have some information back from the IT that I'll share with all of
Sure,
you
okay.
as to whether that's the
Yeah.
more or less expensive way to go in broadcasting.
Other questions?
The barricades. I remember the discussion we had before about people that wanted to have the special events and that we would charge them, and some of that charging had to do with the barricades. So my question is, and I might, again, I might not be remembering the full of how things matched up, but my question is, if we approve the barricades, how is that going to help the people that we wanted to charge for?
So-
Yep.
It's going to help reduce the amount of staff time needed in moving and setting up barricades. So the idea is, in partnership with the DDA, look at someone who can come in and help us develop half a dozen scenarios for jazz festival, art festival, Albert Al Fresco, and other events, and what type of barricade system would be needed, and how to set it up so we use less time. Yes, the idea would still be to charge out the use of those to replace these that we want to buy up front over the life of those barricades. And I'll open it up to Scott or anybody else that might want to.
So part of that line item is starting with a study to make recommendations from a security consultant that will say this is the best way to do it, and then possibly give us some additional thought about how to assess the threat so we implement the appropriate protocols to protect the public. And so that might help us tailor how many barricades we need. So that 600,000 might be on the high end. We'll see after the study, but they'll give us ideas on how other people do it. And they might also make recommendations about permanent infrastructure we could install, or areas that we can rapidly input bollards or things such as that. But the study is step one.
Sure. And when this is presented again, can you, Mr. Bellman, bring back that agreement that we had talked about? And this was for the smaller groups that wanted to reserve a street or something like that. Can you bring that back so I can look at it again and see if we were, what type of charges, if any, we were including?
I can.
Thanks. My next question is, we've been discussing public safety, and we also should start reimagining what community safety looks like. And community safety looks like more lights and better cameras And so is that something that can be included in this somewhere?
It is an expense, yes, that can be reflected in these dollars if we want to allocate some dollars towards that and subtract it from one of the proposals you have on the spreadsheet in front of you.
And so I don't know if you're aware, Heather Pope and Matt Apostle are actively working with PD and the Board of Water and Light to add more streetlights downtown.
Okay.
Working on feedback from the DDA.
Okay.
Heather's here if you want to hit her up on that.
Good.
And some of that will be a conversation with the DDA. They're willing to pay for that downtown, but if you're looking at other areas throughout the community, that would be something that the general fund would have to pay, and so that'd be good use of the ARPA dollars to cover those.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, if you all are already thinking about it and got the money to implement it and stuff, thank you. So I'm good.
And I also presume that when you're doing this assessment in terms of where to put these things, you're also checking with our insurance carriers, who will all have people that are perfectly willing to advise. So if that hasn't happened, I would suggest that you all figure that one out.
Thank you.
And my last
Go ahead.
question is the shortage. Who's figuring out the shortage? Us, or are you going to offer something different, Mr. Baumann?
You mean for the $127,000 shortage? So again, right now, based on the estimates, that's what we're seeing. We can reduce any of those line items to eliminate that shortage, to come up with a balanced proposal to you for January 9th.
But you would like us to discuss that and not you come back and, figure
No,
it out?
I'll balance it. My question is, do you want to supplement the ARPA with general fund balance to
Okay,
cover
yeah.
the 130 or 127,000? It keeps going up every time I talk. Or do you want us to reduce the estimates that are on the spreadsheet in front of you and live within the means?
I get it.
And you'll make a recommendation to us in that regard, correct?
Yes.
Any further questions on this topic? Thanks, staff, for going through this. 6.3, discussion of the Department of Public Works efforts in seeking state and federal grants and funding sources for infrastructure and environmental programs.
Okay, good evening, Council. Scott House. With me is Cliff Walls and Ron Lacoste. So in response to the request for information, we developed a comprehensive list of the various grants and requests for funding from state and federal funding. I'm going to break them down by bins. Some are for water and sewer, some are for streets and sidewalks and bike lanes. Then there's the most novel and emerging one, which is climate and energy, which is in the latter part of the packet. If you want, I can give you the 30,000-foot flyover on some of these, or do you want to dig in on anyone in particular?
I'm going to defer to Dr. Altman because this is his deal. Me, I'd take the 30,000-mile flyover, but make the call, Dr. Altman.
I may have some specific questions if we all have the time and patience, but I think the big picture view would be most welcome.
Okay, so I'm gonna speed date this. So starting first with the Eagle Water Asset Management Grant. So we got roughly $750,000, $750,000 to do asset management, try to do an inventory of lead and copper material service distribution lines, and we got a quarter of a Vector truck. That was a direct grant from us. We just have to report back.
Okay, and I'm sorry. Remember, we're talking to a public here, so
Yeah.
I know you're going to do the acronym thing,
Yeah.
but can you just tell us what EGLE stands for?
Yes, Department of the Energy, Great Lakes, and Environment for the state of Michigan, the
Thank you.
former DEQ. So that was our main match. That was our main source of funding for lead and copper rule compliance. So we're doing inventory and water asset management systems. We're not getting money to replace things. And what that's helping us do is to comply with the requirement to survey all of our service lines by 2025, which in fact has been moved up till October of '24. So we're doing some tap dancing on that, how to figure that out to meet that requirement. Ron and his team have done a lot of work on that. You've recently approved a change order for ML Chartier to increase additional effort for doing that as well. Jump into the next one, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. These are projects that you're very familiar with. This is the water, or the sewer and wharf improvements. Just because it says 7 projects and $93 million does not mean we're going to bond for all that. This is stuff we request for eligibility for. Our intentions are to make additional improvements at the water resource recovery facility to the administrative facility for approximately $21 million, and take care of some electrical work and some integration projects out there that got passed over due to cost overruns in prior projects, and then to tackle CSO, combined sewer system projects in the neighborhoods, starting off with an area along Gunson down to Water's Edge in 25, and then moving out in 27 to Shaw Estates, and then in 29 moving to Elm Valley and other places. And this will be before you in the future as well. So this is basically a loan program. Our challenge will be affordability. Can we do it? We're looking at debt service, and we're baking that into our current CIP right now, balancing all these levers. Because at one point, we were looking at building the ability to cash fund certain levels of projects. We wanted to be able to cash fund 1 to 2 miles of water main a year and the equivalent amount of sewer. Well, when prices doubled or tripled, we lost that window. So that's where these debt service projects, or the neighborhood projects, are going to be more important from the federal side. And our challenge will be being competitive, because everyone else started, we were lucky we were ahead of the curve with the WRF when we did it, because everyone did asset management systems and found they were in the same shape, and Eagle's getting slammed with loan requests. Now, jumping down to the state revolving fund, or the drinking water state revolving fund. This was a similar program to the wastewater and sewer side, but this was 6 projects for $43 million. And this was where you see the water meters, water main, water storage, a lot of work, lead line service replacements. Well, we weren't eligible. So now we need to find a way to fund this. Either we break this up into bite-sized projects and cash fund it, or we seek additional funding through other other financing opportunities, raise rates, or we spread out our project timeline. We're currently discussing this actively in our CIP discussions for 25 through 32. Our initial recommendation is to get after compliance first. We want to remove that lead hazard, because that's just a lot of work for us. It makes people uncomfortable. So we want to address that, but we also want to get after the water meters potentially over several years, because we can't bite the water meter project can be between $4 and $7 million. We can't bite that in 1 year. We'd have to spread that over several years. But every time you start spreading something out, it costs more, and you have frustrated customers. It just has more churn. So that will be a discussion coming up, and as we get into the 25 budget, about how do we tackle this. And we will continue to fight for funding through Eagle. Next, we were going to talk about our surface transportation funds and transportation alternative grants and safe routes to school. These are funds that we apply through Tri-County and to MDOT, and this gives us access to funds for improvements to major roads that are federal aid eligible, and the related transportation infrastructure, such as bike lanes, non-motorized paths. We could do signals as well. So starting here, we have Bircham. We're just covering this here to talk about what we got. And roughly each year, we get about a mile of road. And the federal government will cover between 60 to 80%, depending on what the costs are. And this basically covers the cost to renew the pavement, not necessarily always reconstruct it, maintain the current curb lines. So that's what you see the numbers there for Bircham Avenue, and that was bundled with a TAP grant, Transportation Alternatives, that gave us bike lanes, Safe Routes to School, that gave us islands in the road. So we bundled services and things to get the effects we wanted from the community. And the same thing's going to hold true for Hagedorn, where right now we have the STP, the Surface Transportation, and the Transportation Alternative. And this number is moving because Tri-County might force us to advance construct. Doesn't mean to us, it's just going to impact how we outlay cash. And what that TAP fund for that would pay for would be the bike lanes and for the islands in it as well. That item will be addressed again at Transportation Council after the first of the year, and then it will come to you for a final decision regarding the 4-to-3 conversion. Our challenge is to better educate people. There was significant delays caused by Consumers Energy work that gave people a false narrative of the performance of Hagedorn. And we also heard not issues of Hagedorn, but issues of cut-through traffic in the neighborhood. And so we need to, what are the true problems there and the symptoms? My personal feelings, 4-to-3 conversions have been highly successful here. They improve the conditions for people that live on the street and the traveling public. It reduces accidents and slows people down, and it provides another avenue for transportation for non-motorized. Cruising along for Coolidge, same scenario. 4-to-3 conversion, STP and TAP, and you see the mixture of funds there. And slow me down if I'm going too fast.
May I just what page you're on, please?
Say again?
What page are you on, please? I'm
Sorry, I just finished up page 4. I'm going to go to the start of page 5.
Okay.
And now we're talking about the Safe Routes to School, where you approved the resolution to support the grant. And you see that project as well, and we talked about that in detail last meeting, so I won't go too far there. The next project, Safe Streets for All, that's a regional transportation initiative being ran by Tri-County. Funding for that is pending, but that would add additional improvements for roads, streets, sidewalks, and everything to improve safety within the region through Tri-County. Next, we have Harrison Road Bridge. We were very lucky to get this, $3 million to do a deck replacement in '25. That's currently under design. Our local match is $151,000 out of $3 million. That's a good deal for us, and that will have some pretty significant impacts to MSU, but they're aware of that because
This
they
is
want to
over
save.
Red Cedar River?
Yes.
So does MSU have any responsibility on that?
No, because it's an Act 51 asset, but we'll definitely.
Say that
impact
again,
it.
it's a
an
what?
Act 51 roadway asset. We own the
okay.
bridge. That's the same with Bogue Street as well.
So is that, what's your best projection as to when that construction would actually occur?
It will be the summer of '25.
Okay, and is that the same summer that they're doing all that stuff on Harrison for their new IM building and Trowbridge?
Trowbridge might be later in the project, but there will definitely be impacts.
What was the answer to my question?
Yeah.
Is that the same?
I don't know exactly when when they're doing their.
I suggest you might want to check on that pretty quickly, because if they're going to be doing that at the same time we're doing that bridge, that's going to be bad.
And they're aware of what we're doing because this benefits them. They gave letters of support as well. These are.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
But
But they might not want the consequences as well.
Yeah, they're not
Yes.
going to solve the traffic problem for you,
Yeah.
so,
Are
okay.
you referencing the Health and Wellness Center on like the old Cherry Lane apartments? Is that what you're referring to?
I'm
Or
calling it the new IM building.
Yeah, because
yes.
they're constructing that right now. At least, we're working. through
Yeah, I know,
that,
but
so-
they're going to close part of
Yeah.
Harrison to do that construction, is my
Yeah.
understanding. And they're going to do that during football season, I think, this next year, so, just
Well,
saying.
Hopefully our bridge is done by then, or after. that,
Whatever,
yeah.
okay.
Then the Eagle High Water Infrastructure Grant, I'll let Cliff talk about this. This is a really exciting project.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this one. It's going to be very complex technical engineering stuff, but to break it down, what it is taking a look, modeling our community, the entire community, down to like a grid of 20 square feet for everything from cloudburst analysis, climate predictions that we'll calibrate climate scenarios to these models that we're conducting, essentially trying to figure out if the projects we're building today are going to withstand the storms of tomorrow. There's going to be a large component of public engagement to identify levels of service targets for stormwater infrastructure. Do we need everything at a 10-year level of service, or do we need some variability? Excuse me. So that's going to be a very exciting project. It's going to go through the middle of 2026. I think the 9th of January we'll be here with a contract. We're in negotiations right now, but we're very excited about the firm that we're negotiating with. They have some of the top climatologists in the United States, the people who are doing this work for the city of New York, Houston, the ones who are at the table when they're updating their NOAA 15, NOAA 17 predictions. So we're really going to have some firepower here.
And NOAA, we're just looking at rainfall models because we know that intensity is changing, frequency is changing. How do we design for tomorrow? And and how do we build pipes? What's the cost benefit of upsizing a pipe to a size, or do we need more green infrastructure? So give us.
We're with you.
Is that citywide, not just on, okay.
Yes, it's excluding MSU and some of the ag fields, but everything else, all the neighborhoods. It's the
You say
CSO.
ag fields?
Agriculture, like,
Yep.
like the northern.
Because it
not
doesn't
really ag,
rain,
but-
it doesn't rain on Michigan State University's campus.
Yeah, but all of our storm infrastructure.
Just, in the back of my head, this is something I wanted to do for the state to help inform our planning and land use. So, anyway, I'm glad we're doing it.
It was a one-time funding opportunity. We're actually
Okay.
funded out of the Coastal Management Office, so it's kind of random.
No, that's your fault.
And from here, I'm going to let Cliff speed date on a lot of these recycling and energy ones, and he has a really exciting abstract one that he was throwing spaghetti against the wall on this afternoon.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of speed date some of these, like you mentioned. We got over $400,000 for some recycling infrastructure at the DPW drop-off. I've talked to council before. This has been delayed by supply chain challenges, getting a chassis for the truck, but we finally are at the position where the supply is available to place an order, so we should see some of that. And the compactors here, hopefully within the next 6 months or so. Recycling Partnership, that's a national organization. We work with them. They gave us about $46,000. They, on our behalf, paid directly to a contractor to perform the artificial intelligence pilot project that we did over the past year. This was the first use of artificial intelligence on trucks for contamination reduction in the United States. It was very successful. They found it to be at or even a little better at reducing contamination than traditional feet on the street programs. We're top 3 finalists for the National Program of the Year out of kind of a prestigious nationwide group for this project. And then Ohio State University is releasing an efficacy report on this future of recycling contamination identification here in the coming months, probably just after the holiday.
Can I ask a quick question about that?
Yeah.
So you're using the AI basically to do pattern recognition of what's in the truck as it goes in?
Correct. So it's in the hopper.
Yep.
The cart gets dumped in. It's limited in terms of what it can detect. It's tanglers like bags, plastic bags, styrofoam. It's not identifying, if you threw in a yogurt lid that's too small. It's the big things that are damaging to the infrastructure and can contaminate and spoil loads. And they saw about 26.5% reduction through the educational interventions that they did through this program. So it would take a picture of that actual contamination, blur everything else out. You can't read anything, it's just kind of large images. And then it would send a postcard to that household and say like, hey, just so you know, this is not recyclable, acceptable materials. And a survey is going out to those people who those went to. We just approved the language of that today to kind of see how people thought about it. But we didn't have any complaints. It was pretty positive, and some people were, appreciative of the nudge of, the extra information that was curated to them.
So it's kind of creepy, but it's really great.
And this really helps Ron's team because it takes the burden off the collection staff.
Yeah.
And what's traditionally done is you have teams of like 8 to 12 people who go out and dig through.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay.
Let's keep going.
Market development grant. This was a joint effort between the City of East Lansing and the City of Lansing for a composting feasibility study. I actually inherited this one from Kathy, but the report is final. They came out, I think, Friday, or at least was sent to us as staff. But there's about $77,000 in work.
And so are we going to have composting in the future? Is that one of the conclusions?
What they found, or the market analysis in partnership, they performed this with economists at MSU, is that curbside model is likely not, or is definitely not viable here, but a community drop-off system is worth piloting. So we're in conversations with Eagle on leveraging this report for pilot implementation funding. We applied for another Eagle infrastructure grant this year to do some more internal, improving the collection systems here, like your just bins here, City Hall, Aquatic Center, just any public parcel. We did not get that. There was less money available, and they told us they were trying to get more bang out of the smaller bucks and go for funding larger community systems rather than kind of a little spot project like ours. The Department of Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, this is something that we have not applied for yet, but we are eligible for formula-based funding. So the Fed set aside $76,850 for us. There's no match required. It's due at the end of April, so the Commission on the Environment is still kind of, talking about this, workshopping internally on how we want to use this, and part of the delay was waiting to see how ARPA was going to shake out and see if there was any holes we needed to fill on things like EV infrastructure or the solar project and stuff. But there's a voucher available, so it's kind of like a very quick federal spend versus a typical federal grant. Some of these other things below are not grants, but they're free labor deliverables that we applied for, we took advantage of. The last 2 summers, we hosted a master's level, grad student level fellow, because we are a member of the Catalyst Leadership communities. This is one of the governor's, it's a cohort of communities who are leading in environmental sustainability. So the Ann Arbors, East Lansing, Traverse City, Grand Rapids, and to help build staff support or staff capacity through Eagle, there's funding for one full-time 10-week fellow to work on a project that's important to us. So we had one the last 2 summers. One was the development of a impervious surface inventory, and then this year we had a fellow who was an architecture student and planning, with a planning background, who did a cursory look at the Hannah Community Center to see if there's opportunities for electrifying the HVAC system, because we know the boiler is going to need to be replaced. So we wanted to inform council and decision makers within the city, like even if a boiler, that 1-for-1 replacement is the most economical or sensible option, if it's too hard, not feasible to electrify, we want to make sure that the information's there and that we're looking at all the options available. In each of those programs, there's a technical advisor, so you have like a statewide expert who's meeting with us each week as this fellow is working with the city. And then we're also pending, we applied just a couple weeks ago for the My Healthy Climate Corps. It's AmeriCorps program. Eagle is assembling 30 volunteers, AmeriCorps volunteers, to help implement the My Healthy Climate Plan. And so this is a full-time 7-month fellow or volunteer. It would cost us about $10,000 in a fee, but we would get about $46,000 in labor, because they would have their stipend, their health insurance, their pay, and there's be a lot of benefits of being connected with the other communities who are part of this cohort. So we applied to be a host community for that. I think because we are gold certified sustainable community under MML and very heavily involved in the Catalyst leadership communities, I would think that we would be shoo-in, but I don't want to jinx myself.
Yeah, let's keep moving.
And then these other grants below, one of the challenges we've had for the city of East Lansing is that a lot of the environmental and sustainable related grants are bound by the Justice 40 initiative from the Biden administration, and rightfully so. It states that 40% at least of all infrastructure, climate, any kind of environmental related funding will go towards disadvantaged, historically excluded communities. And so we, through their screening tools, have one census tract that is eligible. That is basically Cedar Village. So the north of the Red Cedar River, south of the road, Grand River, between Bogue and Park Lake is the one census tract that we have a component of as the city of East Lansing that is eligible or to be considered a Justice 40 census tract. So in order to access some of those funds, we've had to partner with City of Lansing and others in the region, because we would not be competitive isolated. That's a broad overview, but we've got an e-waste recycling grant from the city, or from Eagle. City of Lansing was a lead on
just
that.
like the topics, yeah.
Yep. A charging and fueling infrastructure grant, $10 million in partnership with the City of Lansing, City of Lansing Schools, and Clean Cities, pending. Worked with the Board of Water and Light on a levels up prize for moderate low income weatherization, electrification. That was unsuccessful. The City of Lansing applied for $32 million on a USDA's forestry service grant under the IRA. They were successful, but only $5 million. And then through the Public Service Commission, on behalf of Meridian, Lansing, and East Lansing, to a planning grant to develop a framework to deploy community solar throughout the Greater Lansing region. The spaghetti at the wall grant that he was talking about, this is very moonshot, but the EPA has $5.6 billion for implementation grants. In order to be considered for that, you have to be on a state list, the PCAP, the Priority Action Climate Action Plan. We're just throwing some stuff at it to see if something sticks, and if we have a shot, which includes $40 million for solarizing the entire community portfolio, including street lamps, and then also another $73.5 million for a net zero city hall, police station, court complex. Moonshot, but these are the things that we're thinking about.
Okay. And also, so one caveat here, we were talking internally, talking with the city manager, we're doing a lot of this churning, and the lack of a dedicated grant writer, we might be losing opportunities, because a lot of this Cliff is grinding while taking care of residents, and Ron and his team have great ideas, but when you're, fighting water main breaks and handling projects, it's tough to have that focus and know what's out there.
Okay, questions? Any questions?
Yeah, so on your last point, this was the thing that was sort of keeping me up at night for the past several months, because I didn't know any better, but I was very concerned that we're missing out on stuff for whatever reason, either for grant identification bottlenecks or grant writing bottlenecks. It sounds like grant identification is not the problem. It sounds like you've got eyes on just about everything. Is that safe to say?
I think we are doing a good job, but I think there might be more opportunity and someone that's more dedicated that can take ideas and better flesh them out, because it's just not us. There's also the planning and neighborhood development component. We're just one slice of this portfolio that could help everyone. Like a good grant writer, you challenge them, bring back 5 to 10 times your salary or more in resources.
The other thing I think Scott brought to my attention earlier today is sometimes we get last minute notice of a grant opportunity that we've got to flip the application around pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And having someone dedicated to do that would be much more responsive for the
And
city.
it sounds from your email earlier today that we're on this, right? We're gonna.
Yes.
We're gonna.
So you'll see something in the very near future.
Okay.
Is it a staff person or a
Yes.
consultant?
I think I'd start with a staff, because then they can not only help us write, but then file the compliance reports for the grants that we get and help.
And is it for grant opportunities beyond just infrastructure?
Yes. So it'd be for planning, fire department, police, any of the departments that see opportunities to help them write and secure grants that will help us in the future.
One reason there's so many grants available to partner with Lansing is my colleagues over there came up with the idea, the technical stuff, and they kick it off to their grant writer, who's centrally located in the city government. And so all the finance reporting, all the stuff like the Iran sanctions, all the technical stuff you have to sort through, they kick all that. And so they're able to be more nimble and just take on more where, there's been times that it's just a capacity issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions for staff?
I was just going to say thank you for putting together this list. This certainly addressed my questions, and I think it's useful to have this inventory for the community to look at, to see what we're all engaged in. And I'm just thrilled we're going after the sustainability stuff as hard as we are.
And in continuing the discussion, do any of the council members have additional requests of staff for any kind of data stemming from this discussion, or are we where we want to be for tonight?
Not beyond what I've already.
Eric, you're okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. My main issue was,
right,
as I've said, to try to figure out, are we on top of this? And it sounds like we're
okay.
getting there.
Thanks a lot, folks, for coming. Is there any other business before the council?
Can I make one additional announcement, if I may, quickly? Emma Crabtree, who is your secretary to the board, is graduating this Saturday with a bachelor's of psychology and a bachelor's of anthropology. So,
congratulations.
Awesome.
two incredibly useful degrees to apply to your employment at the city of East Lansing.
Well, certainly psychology, I'll vouch for that.
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Alderman, second by Watson. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thanks, people, for all your work tonight.